After receiving a light remastering effort on PC last year, 1997's Chasm the Rift, an early 3D first-person shooter from Ukrainian developer Action Forms, has been ported to all current and last-gen consoles, the Nintendo Switch included. As someone who primarily gamed on a PC through the late 90s, I'm partial to both remastered classic FPS and modern retro-inspired FPS that draw inspiration from them. But despite a passionate and vocal fanbase, this console port of Chasm the Rift is great for preservation, but is difficult to recommend above other iconic games from the same period, especially those that have received the same treatment. The closest point of comparison is clearly 1996's Quake, but with more detailed enemy models, smoother animations, an abundance of pixelated particles and gore, and a longer time to kill, it feels a little closer to Quake 2, which released a few months after it. Sadly, it never feels as consistent or compelling as those games, despite having several novel mechanics for the time. Starting with the good, Chasm the Rift has both an interesting premise and an intelligible story, all told through unexpectedly verbose mission briefings. They feature truly awful voice acting, but it edges just into the so bad it's good territory, and feels like a big step up from the simple text blocks of Doom or Quake. You take on the role of yet another nameless commando, this time defending Earth from the Time Strikers, time-traveling mutants intent on invading the planet across multiple periods in history. After defending a modern military facility and preventing them from claiming a nuclear arsenal, you travel to ancient Egypt to discover more about their plans, jump forward to the Middle Ages to thwart yet another attempt, and finally take the battle to their home dimension. The structure is familiar, but the premise allows for a decent mix of environments and enemy types, and the idea predates some more recognizable time-traveling FPS like Daikatana and Time Splitters in 2000, or Serious Sam in 2001. There are 4 episodes, each containing 4 levels and a boss, plus a 3-level expansion pack to wrap up the story. It's a brisk experience, but, like the games from that period, you're encouraged to hunt for secrets or tackle higher difficulty levels that boost the enemy count and incoming damage. It has most of the basics in place you would want from a classic FPS. Movement and strafing are blisteringly fast by default. Jumping is less useful than running between gaps at full speed, and most guns, aside from the starting single-barrel shotgun, look and sound reasonably powerful when you pull the trigger, something helped no end by the pixelated but wonderfully exaggerated particle and gore system. Chasm the Rift has bullet sponge enemies, something I normally dislike, but this pushes you to master the dismemberment system. Heads can almost always be taken off with a few well-placed shots, but the most dangerous enemies are best dealt with by first blasting off their weapon-bearing limbs to reduce their damage output, and leave them stumbling about trying to bludgeon or bite you. An equally thoughtful approach is needed to defeat the bosses, in puzzle-like sequences, rather than just by pumping hundreds of rounds into them. Now, given its age, the console versions handle Chasm the Rift's upscaled visuals and remastered audio with ease, and deliver a solid 60 frames per second frame rate, though the updated HUD is prone to bugging out at times, forcing you to switch to the classic version until the next level loads. More impressive for me was the gamepad support, as the default controls felt good, and only took me a minute of tweaking sensitivities and acceleration to find a sweet spot. I'm not sure I'd want to tackle the highest difficulty, but with auto-aim engaged, Chasm the Rift struck a good balance between assisting me and rewarding my skill on a gamepad. Now, despite some great ideas and solid foundations, Chasm the Rift just doesn't feel as consistent, balanced, or dynamic as many of its peers were. When it comes to level design, after a somewhat generic opening episode, I enjoyed the increased focus on traps and puzzle-like obstacles in the Ancient Egypt and Middle Ages episodes, but all too often Chasm the Rift resorts to maze-like levels with switches and keys to find, often with no clear indication of where to use a key or what the switch you activated just did, and there are constant ambushes. Those ambushes are problematic, as many enemies have either hit-scan weapons or fire projectiles that move so fast they might as well be. It's all too easy to turn a corner and have half your health shredded before you can react. It's a design that leads to slow advances, frequent retreats, constant abuse of the quick-save quick-load function, and corner-hugging firefights, baiting, attack animations, dashing behind cover, and then stepping out to return fire. The knock-on effect of playing cautiously is that you have more time to realize just how limited the enemy roster is, and how interchangeable many of the weapons feel. With the exception of the crowd-clearing grenade launcher and whatever the BFG equivalent is called, other weapons, including the blade gun that featured so heavily in marketing, are just as effective at removing heads or limbs as any other. Sure, all weapons have different firing rates and per-shot damage, but it feels like they all have the same overall DPS, bullet spread is negligible, and optimal range feels irrelevant in the cramped environments. At almost any point in the game, you can remove limbs and heads just as effectively with the double-barreled shotgun, the blade gun, crossbow, or minigun, making for increasingly mundane combat when, no matter the weapon, you're holding down the trigger for the same amount of time to achieve exactly the same result. Now, my gripes aside, if you're one of the long-time fans of the original, and you've been looking to play this on the couch or on the go with a Switch, This console release of Chasm the Rift is easy to recommend. It's feature complete, looks, sounds and runs about as good as it could without a complete overhaul of the engine or assets, and the gamepad support is solid right out the gate. If, on the other hand, you're simply curious about a classic first-person shooter from a fledgling Eastern European developer before the region became the powerhouse they are today, Chasm the Rift has some neat ideas, but it doesn't come together as well as it should, and it just can't stand toe-to-toe with other early 3D juggernauts like Quake or Unreal. If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel as it helps us grow.